We have seen some teams help themselves. We have seen some teams make some aimless picks here. Round one of the 2025 NFL draft, in the first 22 picks, we are going to be breaking down pick 23 onward with you and riding all the way through until we can give some of these teams some grades once round one is over. So stay tuned. Join us. We're going to be joined by the entire Sharp Football family momentarily. Don't miss it. Round one of the 2025 NFL draft is underway. We are entering the Green Bay Packers pick. They are picking at number 23. We don't know yet who they're going to be selecting, but we're going to be breaking down all these picks live with you, breaking the news, sharing some analysis as these picks happen in real time, but also looking back at some of the earlier picks, of course, in this draft, picks 1 through 22. Some surprises along the way, some things that went as chalk early on. Looking forward to discussing it here with Ray Summerlin, Rich Hribar, and Ryan McCrystal. So, Ray, I'll just throw it to you. How do you want to go through this thing? Do we have the Green Bay Packers pick yet, or are we still waiting to get that one in?
Yeah, we're still waiting. I think we can open this up, though, with the pick at 22 to the Marion Hampton going to the Chargers. And that's been a very, it's an interesting selection from a fantasy perspective, from, kind of what the Chargers, obviously we know what the Chargers want to do. And so I guess I'll just throw it to Rich. Rich has been writing, fantasy fallout articles over at the website, sharpfootballanalysis.com, all night. And I'd recommend you go and check those out. He will have a Hampton article up later, but just kind of what are your initial thoughts here, Rich, about this move?
First of all, I'm so tired, boss. I'm so tired. Trying to write up all these guys, as they get picked. I always forget how strenuous it is just trying to hope I got offensive players will get picked back to back. But this is the first real landing spot that is kind of genuinely exciting after the Ashton Jeanty to the Raiders pick. And it's funny that it is just another running back, but you look at Hribar and Greg Roman, this is what they're going to do. Ryan was on it last year. Their first pick as a duo last year was getting an offensive tackle. They're using the first round equity on a running back the year after that. We know this is a team that wants to run the football, and they had a lot of issues running the football outside of some J.K. Dobbins, explosive runs early in the season last year. This was a team that was 28th in rate of runs that failed to gain yardage last year. They were 17th in yards rushing. They were 23rd in success rate as running back runs. They added Najee Harris earlier this offseason, but that was only in a 1-year deal. They were still looking for a long-term commitment and also a player to play with Najee Harris, a player that's lost, touches every year of his career since his rookie year. So this is one of the first landing spots since Jeanty went, where it's all right, this one, now we're cooking with something for some fantasy purposes.
And to throw it to Ryan here, I think, he gives you, it seems to me, and I'm up front here from the beginning, I do not watch the tape, and I do not profile these players like Rich and Ryan do by any stretch of the imagination. But it seems like Hampton, the kind of player he is, can give the Chargers maybe even a better version of what J.K. Dobbins was last year, the big plays, the ability to create these big plays out of, how they want to run their offense, and just, this bruising guy that can create yards after contact. Does that seem fair?
Yeah, he's a between the tackles runner who also has a speed to hit some home runs when he gets opportunity. My question with Hampton was that I don't feel like he has really great vision. He's not the kind of runner that I would want to invest in if he was behind a bad offensive line. But like Rich said, they invested in the offensive line last year. This is going to be a pretty good offensive line unit that he's running behind. So it is a pretty good fit. I think he'll be productive right off the bat. And he's a 3-down type of running back, which is the kind of guy that Hribar likes. He typically wants to have someone back there who's just going to carry the load. And obviously Najee Harris is there. He's going to get some touches too. But I would expect Hampton to come in and just see the overwhelming majority of touches right out of the gate.
Yeah, I think that's what we're all looking towards as well, as Rich said, with that 1-year contract. As we go through this tonight, we're definitely going to be going back and looking at some of the bigger stories of the first round. I think the biggest story from the first round is definitely the Browns and Jaguars trade that opened it up. And we got it. All right, we got Matthew.
We got it. Matthew Golden is going to the Green Bay Packers. Ryan McCrystal absolutely nailed it, guessing that the Green Bay Packers might draft a wide receiver. Ryan, how many drafts in a row, or how many years was it since they drafted a wide receiver? You had some sort of statistic on this or something like that.
I think it was it Javon Walker? Was it their last receiver in the first round? I think. So like, what,
Is that
22?
Possible?
I think so. Was that 2003?
think that's what it was.
Maybe. So like about 22 years or
Actually,
so?
I've seen it 2004, the first wide receiver in the first round since 2004. So you were close. That was definitely one that we tossed out there in one of the mailing lists at real plus odds. I think that was 6-1 odds. Packers position a first player drafted a wide receiver. Now, I do want to say this before we get into the actual analysis of this pick, which I want to get Ryan's thoughts and your guys' thoughts as well. Ryan, this has got to be very stressful for you. Like, you had them picking a wide receiver, but it was Emeka Egbuka, who went just a couple picks previously. You are in a competition here you're one of the most accurate mock drafters in the world. Your top 8, I think, over the last 5 years. And the top of this draft was chalk. I just want to get a quick reaction. We'll go through the rest of the draft, but these first 20 picks or so, like, are you pulling your hair out? How do you feel about the current status? Because Brendan Donahue, another one of our mock drafters, he seems pretty down on everything. But my guess is that a lot of mock drafters, I was looking, there generally was a consensus with a lot of these picks. And when they're wrong, a lot of them are wrong. So how are you feeling?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not too frustrated because basically what happened that messed up a lot of the mock drafts was when Ted McMillan went to the Panthers, that bumped a lot of the defensive players down a slot, essentially. So they kind of kept coming off the board in the exact order we thought, more or less. It was just that we had an offensive player go where a defensive player we thought was going to happen, and it just kind of messed up everything there on out. So most people are scoring a little bit lower this year in the mock draft scoring contest because there's fewer exact matches. But it feels like a relatively predictable draft. Like you mentioned, I had Golden going to the Packers previously. I switched it to Egbuka. Like, we kind of knew they were going to go wide receiver based on all their pre-draft moves. It was leaning that direction. That's just the frustration you have to live with when you're putting together mock drafts. Like, that's why when I do my mock draft, I like having a really detailed write-up, hitting on a bunch of different players, kind of talk through the decision-making process. Because when you have to just put one name next to a team, you're going to get more than half of them wrong every single year. Just one pick out of the blue, like McMillan this year, ends up messing everything up. But if you read through my write-ups, I mention almost every team, their first round pick, I'm mentioning them in the write-up. So they're not too shocking, like with the Golden pick being the perfect example. I thought Egbuka was likely to be there, and I still think he probably would have been their pick if he were there, because I had in my mock draft had both Egbuka and Golden. But when he's gone, a Golden makes sense. So like I talked about that in the write-up. So there's certain picks that just completely come out of the blue that just shake everything up, and every so often you have a year like this where it's going to be slightly less accurate because nobody had McMillan going to the Panthers.
Yeah, that's what I was telling Brendan. I was like, keep your head up. Let's nail some of these picks down the stretch here. Everybody's getting them wrong. So let's just see what ends up happening here. But absolutely, Rich, what is some of your thoughts about specifically the fit of these last 2 wide receivers, I guess? We just saw Emeka Egbuka go, and then obviously Matthew Golden to the Green Bay Packers, his speed being one of his most positive attributes that he's bringing to the table up in Green Bay.
Yeah, the Golden gives them kind of a downfield threat. They're probably not going to have Christian Watson, arguably, for maybe the whole year. I mean, his dad thinks he's going to be back in week 12. I don't know if I'm going to really stock that. Unfortunately, if you're counting on a Dontavian Wicks breakout, that's definitely a roadblock. But when you look at the way Jordan Love played last year, it was kind of like an all or nothing. It was very comparable to what we joke about with Russell Wilson. It was basically check down or throw it deep. He threw the ball at the intermediate levels only 16.9% of the time. That was 23rd in the NFL. He had the second highest deep target rate behind Anthony Richardson, and the team really reduced their passing volume, being a run first team. Some of that had to do with, Love's injuries over the course of the season, but, also they got Josh Jacobs and they became like a running team, which is what that system inherently wants to do, the Shanahan tree. So they do get that speed threat. It is one of these things where I look at the landing spot for Golden, and I do think that he ends up in like kind of a log jam where you kind of see a lot of these, speed wide receivers, which, Ryan has talked about, all this draft process of it being kind of a trap. So I don't know if there's a huge target tree for him, but it's definitely a bump for, a guy like Jordan Love, just being able to replace that deep target threat. But I don't see a lot of targets immediately available for Matthew Golden.
And that was an issue from your write-up on him that he had in college at Texas as well, right? So we have a guy coming into this situation with a lackluster production profile in college, coming to, a situation where there's a lot of target competition, even if, Christian Watson is going to miss most of the season. He's in the final year of his contract, I believe, right, Watson? And so we're even with that, Golden's coming into this situation with a ton of target competition. I think the Egbuka, if we're on this subject here, the Egbuka one going to the Bucs is so interesting because of what we expect Chris Godwin to be and kind of what he was last year before the injury, what Egbuka did in college. Like, if they just signed Godwin to a long extension, perhaps they're going to lose Evans, but does this really solve that issue? It's an interesting kind of fit for me, Ryan. Do you have any thoughts on kind of how this might all work out with those three guys and maybe what the Bucs long-term plans are here?
Before we get to Ryan in the Bucs, I just want to mention the next pick is in. It's Donovan Jackson from Ohio State going to the Minnesota Vikings. And the reason I think, Ryan, you can comment on this as well. I think you have some connections in Minnesota in addition to, answering Ray's question there. But on this one, the interesting note here is that a lot of people were expecting Minnesota to be one of those teams that would look to trade down because they don't have a whole lot of draft capital this year. And so a quarterback needy team might come into the bottom of the first round and trade with the Minnesota Vikings to get a quarterback and give Minnesota what it might need, which is extra draft capital. And clearly I thought that Minnesota was open to that, but maybe these offers of teams that are looking to come up, Ray, they just aren't good enough. These teams aren't getting enough value here in the trade downs. And so none of these teams actually want to trade down. But at any rate, Minnesota sticks and picks and goes offensive line. Go ahead, Ryan, with answering the questions about the wide receiver room down in Tampa Bay.
Yeah, I mean, they probably decided to stick and pick there because this quarterback class sucks. Nobody wants to draft them. Exactly what I said on the show a couple days ago, playing out in real time right here.
But how do you actually feel? Yeah, how do you actually feel about it?
Yeah, but going back to Ray, what you were saying about the Bucs, I love that pick. That's one of my favorite picks of the first round so far. From a few different angles. I mean, first of all, just from the Bucs perspective, look at the construction of that team. Yeah, they needed more help on defense. But if you add like Jahad Campbell or someone like that, or Donovan Ezaraku to the pass rusher, does that really change? Like, does that suddenly become like a championship caliber defense? No, of course not. It just makes you marginally better. The strength of the team is offense. And you've got a good but not great quarterback. If you add another weapon, a guy who is the most polished wide receiver prospect in this class and is going to come in and contribute immediately, even if it's as your third weapon, now you've got three legit weapons. If everybody's healthy out there, that could take your offense from just a very good offense to one of the best in the league. And maybe you can actually compete in the NFC at the highest level with a great offense, and you can get by with just an okay defense, which was still only going to be just an okay defense if you added just a mediocre first-round defensive prospect, because that's all that's on the board. There's no studs out there for them to pick on defense. So I love the way that they decided to address that. Like, this is what's actually going to, adding to the strength is what's going to make them a better team this year, not just adding a mediocre prospect to the defensive side of the ball. Because Egbuka he's ready to step in. Like, he does not need to develop like Goldenwood, or even McMillan needs a little bit of development too. Egbuka is so polished in all aspects of the game. I think he's going to contribute immediately.
All right, I'm going to interrupt you right there. We have a trade up. The New York Giants have traded with the Houston Texans. Wow. The pick after the Minnesota Vikings. Giants are indeed coming up to pick 25. The Houston Texans are moving backwards. They were a team that was potentially looking to do this as well. Who's the selection, Ryan? What's your best guess right now? Dart, Sanders?
I mean, probably Dart. Like there's probably something to that. Everyone was talking about it, that was the quarterback they like. It's insane.
Joe Shane's son. Joe Shane's son.
Yeah. I guess he actually knew something this year.
Ray, is that your guess too? Would you go with Dart based on the tea leaves?
Yeah, I don't want to upset Ryan, but I like Dart more than I like Sanders anyway. And so I assume that's going to be the pick here for the Giants. We'll have to wait and see. As we're on the subject of trades, I do want to get to that Browns Jaguars trade before we get too deep into this, because I thought it was an interesting conversation that happened as we saw this, starting, in which, Warren, you seem to be like, I don't know if the Browns should do this. And Ryan, you're like, well, let's see what they get in return. And then after we've now seen what they got in return, that they got, a second, a fourth, a 2026 first rounder. Like, Warren, have your thoughts on this changed? Kind of the Browns trading back, getting out of the Travis Hunter business and trying to, get all this draft capital for next year as well with that first round pick. Are you more okay with this move now for the Browns than you seem to be in the first time we were really looking at it?
Yeah, absolutely. I tweeted this out. If the Jacksonville Jaguars win the Super Bowl this year, so that means they will have the number 32 pick in the first round next year. Even if that were to happen, this draft pick, the trade would be massively lopsided in favor of the Cleveland Browns in terms of a draft value. Now, people are coming into my mention saying, oh, well, I'd rather have the Super Bowl than, of course, that's not the point that I'm making. The point is that the odds that Jacksonville actually wins the Super Bowl is very unlikely. Jaxson Dart is the pick to the New York Giants. Carson Shane for GM. This kid knows what he's doing. This kid, Joe Shane's son, he said that his dad should have picked Jaden Daniels last year, drafted Jaden Daniels, should have never gotten rid of Saquon Barkley. And now he is making moves for his dad, going with Jaxson Dart. And guess what? I actually feel great for him because, well, not only is he right, he gets to brag for the rest of his life about it, but it didn't screw them, because like there was a world where what if somebody traded in front of the Giants or in some capacity to like steal Jaxson Dart because they knew that this kid had leaked it, and then he would have been in all sorts of trouble for like years. That did not happen, and they go up and they get Jaxson Dart. So let's dive deeper into this subject with the three of us here, because this is arguably the biggest move of the entire first round, is what were the Giants going to do here. But just to polish that off, that compensation without the Jaguars winning the Super Bowl, even if they finish middle of the pack next year, they finish with what Las Vegas expects them to finish from a win total perspective, it's a even more sweep towards the Cleveland Browns from a draft value perspective. So the value totally in favor of the Cleveland Browns on that one, and was not particularly close through a variety of metrics, whether you want to go as old school as like the Jimmy Johnson trade chart, or you want to go very new school with like over the cap or AV or anything in between. The Cleveland Browns mop the floor with them. Now, hopefully Travis Hunter works out for the Jacksonville Jaguars and the first-year general manager down there in Jacksonville. But let's talk about this. Ray, who do you want to toss it to here with this reaction to Jaxson Dart for the New York Giants?
Well, I think we should go to Ryan here first and kind of talk about what the Giants are getting in Jaxson Dart. I know that you would prefer Shedeur Sanders over him. You'd prefer Shedeur Sanders over Cam Ward. But I mean, I'm pretty sure you still had Jaxson Dart in that top 100, right? And so what are we getting here out of Dart for the Giants?
He's a developmental prospect. I prefer Shedeur Sanders slightly over Ward and Dart, basically because my philosophy is to kind of play it safe. Sanders will be a capable starting quarterback in the league. I think both Dart and Ward have higher ceilings. Dart, though, there's such a huge range of outcome. Like, he could be a pretty good starter. He could be a zero. Like, it could just completely fall apart. And the Giants, it's possible everybody gets fired and they're picking third overall next year and they draft a quarterback next year just to replace him. Like, it could go sideways very quickly. He's a pretty good athlete, though. You could kind of squint and make some athleticism comparisons between him and Josh Allen. So that's obviously appealing given Daboll's history. He's got a pretty good arm. The big problem is accuracy. Like, he doesn't throw a very good deep ball specifically. He was bailed out by his receivers at Ole Miss. He had Trey Harris, who had a really good year the first half of the season, really lit it up, bailed him out. He was one of those receivers that you could just kind of toss it up to, and he would go get it, and that worked out really well for Ole Miss. He comes from a funky offense too. It's not quite as extreme as sometimes we talk about quarterbacks. Tennessee recently, we talked about a lot when Hendon Hooker entered the draft about that, how that's an offense that doesn't translate to the NFL. Lane Kiffin's offense is not that extreme, but it's not a smooth transition to an NFL offense either. So there's going to be a learning curve, which, he probably doesn't have to start week 1. So he'll have some time to figure it out. But I also just want to go through the list of quarterbacks that are drafted in the late first round, because we often hear about second round quarterbacks. Don't do it. They're really bad. Really, it's if they're not a top 10 pick, like if you're not willing to go spend a top 10 or at least top 15 pick, there's a reason why they slide, because they're not good. There's a couple hits, and I'll go through the list. But the last time someone was drafted 20th to 32nd, you had Kenny Pickett, bust. Jordan Love, that's working out so far. Before that, we had Lamar Jackson, absolute home run, one of the 2 home run picks in this list. Paxton Lynch, before that, bust. Johnny Manziel, Teddy Bridgewater, not a bust, but didn't totally work out. Brandon Whedon, bust. Tim Tebow, epic bust. Brady Quinn, bust. Aaron Rodgers, the other absolute home run Hall of Famer. Jason Campbell, another wasn't a bust, didn't quite work out though. J.P. Losman, bust. Rex Grossman, basically a bust. The team had some success, but didn't work out. Patrick Ramsey, bust. Before that, Jim Druckenmiller. I mean,
that's back in the day. Now we're getting back.
It's
in the
a
day.
brutal. It's a brutal list. There are 2 absolute home runs on that list, but it's a low percent, a much lower percentage than top 10 quarterbacks even, which doesn't, there's plenty of busts in the top 10 as well. But my point is, when someone is not viewed as this is a guy you've got to get within the top 10 picks, they start sliding down the board. There's a good reason for it. There's a lot of flaws, and you got to find a way to fix it. And so this just feels like this is just pure desperation. They're trying to save their jobs because it hasn't gone well the first 4 years. And, it could work out. Maybe Daboll really does have the magic dust that, worked with Josh Allen, and it will work with Jaxson Dart. I don't think that he is, so far removed from success that it can't work out. But it's a really big risk.
Well, let me interject there. Go ahead, Ray.
First of all, the Falcons have traded back into the first round, and we'll get to that whenever they make their pick, because that's very, very interesting. Also, you called everybody a bust, but Tim Tebow a massive bust, which is odd. And then also Super Bowl winner Kenneth Pickett Esquire. That's really important. But I do think that from a fantasy perspective with Jaxson Dart, this is a kind of an odd situation. We're certainly not planning anything for 2025. I don't think you were particularly high on anybody except Cam Ward, and even that in dynasty format. So kind of where are you standing with this landing spot for Jaxson Dart, Rich?
All right, first of all, I'm looking at this package that the Falcons just gave up to move up, and it's significantly more than what the Giants just gave up to move it to take Jaxson Dart. Are
they taking Shedeur Sanders?
The Rams also got a future first rounder, whereas the Texans only shuffled up. They got an extra second, and then an extra third for next year.
Well, I'll tell you this: all the calculators. I'll give it back to you, Rich, in a second. But all the calculators, OTC, AV, Jimmy Johnson, old school, the newer metrics, they are all having these trade ups be very lopsided. Like the Giants got worked in this trade up to go and get Jaxson Dart, and now the Falcons, I'm sure, are getting worked even further, as you mentioned.
Yeah, they gave up a 2026 first round pick for the Rams, and then pick 46, which is was going to be their next pick to come up too. So significant gain for the Rams. In that trade. I don't even remember what we were talking about before.
It's fine.
That, to be honest,
they came up for James Pierce Jr., which is really interesting. We can go straight into this. They came up for James Pierce Jr. They ended up with Jelon Walker at 15. We obviously knew that this was a massive hole in their defense that they had to fill, was this pass rush. They're now taking 2 shots at it in the first round. Pierce Jr. is interesting because of there are lots of questions about him in college. I'll let you expand on that a little bit, Ryan. But if we didn't have those questions, I wonder if he's even here at this point in the first round. But there were some issues in college with him, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of off-field questions. I'm not even entirely clear on what it is. It just sounds like some of the team's interviews didn't go great. Maybe the Tennessee coaching staff didn't have like the most positive things to say about him in terms of his football character. I saw like the love of the game, quote unquote, like questioned with him.
I saw a rumor that he just didn't show up to like workouts and practice, which again, rumors. I don't know if that's true, but like that was all out there as well.
Yeah, I mean, who knows exactly what's true, but like those types of questions don't get raised if it's a non-issue. Like it's obviously an issue. The question is, to what degree is it an issue, and can the Falcons fix it? But talent-wise, he's a first-round pick, and none of the other players we're talking about from pick, like 2022 on are in a vacuum guys that you want to take in the first round. Whereas Pierce, from a talent perspective, is. So I think that's what the Falcons are doing. They're saying like, we'll forfeit a future first round pick because we're getting someone that we actually believe is a true first rounder. And the later picks in this first round are, for the most part, teams are going to be having to they have no choice but to reach, because there just are not 32 players who have like a traditional first round grade.
Warren, what do you think about what the Falcons are doing here, trying to build up this defense with these two pass rushers? We saw it as such a massive need. We've talked about this division. Ryan talked about the Bucs, going out and making their offense better and trying to solidify, this division. I said on the podcast last week that I think the Bucs are maybe underrated because of the division they play in. But obviously the Falcons getting Penix, like this, they're obviously going out and doing what they need to do, but you have to have questions about maybe how some of this draft capital has been spent the last couple years. So
yeah,
it's interesting.
It's interesting. Interesting is a polite way to put it, Ray. It's very strange how much the Atlanta Falcons are giving up to go after the players that they want. And it's a strategy that most GMs try to operate the opposite path, because the opposite path has been proven to be a little bit more successful. Not trading up, trading down, going after and filling best player, or being smart about your needs rather than being so aggressive as they are doing right now this year and last year. But I do want to mention the Brian Daboll thing real quick, back with the New York Giants. Ryan, absolutely correct. Like these guys, Daboll and Shane, are coaching and managing the team for their jobs, which is not exactly where you want your front office to be in an NFL draft situation. But that's the reality of it. It's still just insane to me how they did not just lose week 17 against the Indianapolis Colts, and then they could have gotten the number 1 overall pick. They were dead to rights sitting there having the number 1 draft pick Sunday morning before week 17, 8 days before the season ended, and they wouldn't have had to do anything. And then they tried their hardest. They said that the reports were that they were the most aggressive team trying to trade up to the number 1 overall pick. It did not work with the Tennessee Titans, so they didn't get their quarterback 1 that they wanted. And so now they trade back up into the bottom of the first round to get them. Now, to be fair, I don't know where Jaxson Dart is going to go, and in terms of his career, how successful of an NFL career he will have. But I will say that I do not believe Brian Daboll loved any of the quarterbacks that he had been served to date or coached with the New York Giants so far. He inherited these guys. He wasn't responsible for giving Daniel Jones the extension. That was when he was very much so more hands off on things, and the front office do it. They deal with it. That's not my job. I'll do my job. And his job was being impacted by their job. And so he started getting a little bit more involved in it, as it turns out. Now, if you're saying, Ryan, that this is the guy that he really wanted, probably a lot more involved in trying to get somebody who he could have some success with. So, yeah, I don't love the value that either of these two teams, the Giants or the Atlanta Falcons, surrendered in order to move up. But it is one thing, though, Ray, I'll say history has shown, if you're going after that quarterback, you should be willing to give up a little bit more, because the quarterback is such a impactful position that maybe it's okay if you get fleeced a little bit. But so that might be the excuse for the Atlanta Falcons last year. But for any other positions, like going after James Pierce Jr., that's just not the habit that you want to start making as a general manager.
Yeah, I just saw that Falcons trade in the hall. It's not quite as bad as I thought, because basically they swapped They gave away next year's first rounder to get this year's first rounder. Then they gave away a second round pick, but they got a third round pick back. So they basically are just swapping the first rounders and then dropping down around and then throwing in a 7th round pick. So it's not that bad. They just decided that they would rather spend that pick this year instead of next year, which kind of makes sense given the division they're in, right? Like, why can't they win that division? They absolutely could, especially if Walker and Pierce come in and contribute right away. So even if the draft value is off a little bit, I can at least see what they're doing. It's not as completely insane as like what the Jaguars gave up to me.
Apparently, the difference is, according to OTC, and I haven't had a chance to plug it into my calculators here, it's the equivalent of the 67th pick is what they ultimately surrendered. So a low second round pick is the difference. And if the Atlanta Falcons happen to be bad next year, then that, gives the Houston Texans a lot more to work with. The LA Rams, that's who they were trading with.
I'm interested in kind of the Rams part of this because I've been fascinated, as I assume most people have been fascinated, by their ability to just kind of win on day 2 over the last, what are we now, 3 years in here? So they're adding another day 2 pick. They're moving back. As you said, Ryan, they, maybe they didn't think that the value was here and that these are real kind of like first round picks. So we're adding one for next year. But I mean, we've obviously got Braden Fisk last year, Byron Young, Kobe Turner.
Sorry, I have to do the
go ahead.
Like, what is that? The D Brown. I have to do the D Brown. Ryan just nailed direct pick Malaki Starks to the Ravens. That was him and Brendan. You guys both hit a perfect player to team match at the right pick. So what does that give you for something like that, Ryan? A 3 points for something like that?
Yeah, direct hit is worth 3 points. You get 2 points for a direct hit, 1 point for having a player in the first round. So a direct hit is essentially a 3-pointer.
Love it. And we gave out the long shot plus 650 Ravens to go safety as their first position of drafted player. So that was a good one.
I'm interested. We had a conversation about this after the combine, Ryan, and I do think you're probably a little bit lower on Malaki Starks than consensus. But we had a conversation about kind of what we saw Amanawore do, like how that affects kind of what we're seeing in the safety market. It had been a lot of, Malaki Starks and, that's the guy, but now we see him still go first safety off the board here, unless I'm forgetting a pick to the Ravens. It's an interesting situation.
Yeah, it seems like a good fit for what they need. They need someone in the deep secondary because Kyle Hamilton, obviously he's like their chess piece, so they move all around. He plays in the deep secondary as well when they do 2 high safety looks, but they move him into the box and the slot and whatnot. Whereas Starks is someone who's going to live in the deep secondary. My question with him, and it is a question I have specific to this fit because they do move Hamilton around so much, is he doesn't have great range. And Georgia really specifically tried to cover that up by playing a lot of 2 high coverages. But 2 high coverages are not quite as common in college as they are in the NFL. A lot of teams just have like a safety with elite range that just covers a lot of ground in the deep secondary. Georgia, I believe it was like the 8th highest rate in the country of 2 high usage. And I think that they switched to that because Starks doesn't have elite range. So he was very good in that system. There's rave reviews about the type of person he is, leadership, his like football IQ, as far as his leadership, like directly on the field. He's that type of player, which I'm sure is something that the Ravens love. They tend to target those types of guys. But because they do move Hamilton around a lot, he's going to be alone in the deep secondary pretty often. I wonder if that holds him back a little bit from reaching the ceiling that they're hoping for.
They also have Ardarius Washington, right? And so I do think that it was interesting with what we saw Hamilton and Rich, you hit on this a lot during the season. This defensive turnaround we had for the Ravens came when we saw Hamilton move away from the line more. And so my one concern when we gave out that safety pick is, do they just want Hamilton back there and might they go corner here, right? And might they try to just have Hamilton play where he was playing in the second half of last season when that defense was really hitting. But now that they've, like you said, coming to Starks, or they're going to move Hamilton back up, how is that going to work? Is that really the best thing for this defense? I do think that there are a lot of questions there for where are they actually trying to go? What do they want out of this? All of those things. We've got a bit of a lull here now with Malaki Starks. I don't know how much we can talk about Malaki Starks. I do want to get back.
I can go on.
You just keep going. It's fine. I guess we can get back to Jaxson Dart though, Rich. We were kind of going down the path of like what what we're doing with this guy in Dynasty 2025, it doesn't seem like he's. I mean, it would be surprising if he gets starts, although we see this happen over and over again.
You're a first-round quarterback. You're starting year one.
Yeah, he's starting.
It's like, yeah, man. We've been down this road too many times.
You're right. As I was saying it, I was regretting that I was saying it.
Yeah,
so,
especially,
you're right.
Especially when we're talking about Russell Wilson, who has just left 2 franchises immediately.
Moonball.
Like that's he's gonna start sooner than later.
Yeah.
And pour one out for Jameis Winston, our favorite bad quarterback in the NFL. Just it always happens to him. But there's a reason why we talked about this last year too. Why Jameis always finds himself in this spot. It's because he's not very good. He's just fun. He's new Ryan Fitzpatrick, like he was Ryan Fitzpatrick.
How dare
right?
you? Actually, that's perfect. A new Ryan Fitzpatrick. But yeah, so
because he was a fantasy juggernaut, right? Like he created like his own game environment, his own game scripts. Like that game against Denver last year was the perfect Jameis experience. It's like everything we love about Jameis Winston for betting, for watching football, for fantasy football. Like it's the whole package. Now we're probably gonna have some boring Giants football again, but at least we'll have a young rookie quarterback to kind of take some snaps here. I am curious though, even Ryan thinks too. I mean, the state of this offensive line though is still a big question mark. Like this Giants offensive line is literally for the last 3 years they've just put band-aids over it. Ever since they kind of bricked on the Evan Neal pick, they signed veterans, John Runyon last year, Greg Van Roten, Jermaine Illuminor. None of those guys were really, effective players last year. Andrew Thomas has been significantly injured the last 2 years. And Jaxson Dart is a guy who wants to play in that play action game, have a clean pocket, step up and make clean throws. Like he's going to see significantly more muddy pockets, in this team than he saw, last year at Ole Miss. And, Ryan, when I did the QB show with him, talked about, when they were forced to face good defensive teams, I mean, those were some of the warts that showed up for Jaxson Dart. So, I mean, this offensive line is still a big question mark for the Giants. When you have a rookie quarterback and you give up some capital to get him, you still have to address that. And that's still in play here for the New York Giants.
The mobility, though, was key. I'll give it to Ryan in a second, but the mobility was key because Russell Wilson, as he's gotten older, is just getting less and less mobile. And he also sort of panics when he is under pressure a little bit. I thought Brian Daboll could work around some of the deficiencies of Russell Wilson and have a moderate amount of success, but where is that getting you? It's not getting you to win anything meaningful in 2025. And so I'm excited for them that they have Dart, but Dart's mobility and his quickness is definitely going to be an asset behind that offensive line, but you're absolutely right, Rich. There's still going to be a ton of pressure coming down his pike every time he's dropping back on known passing situations specifically. So they're going to have to figure out a way to be efficient enough on early downs to keep him out of those. Any thoughts there, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I saw the one comment that we pulled up on the screen that the Giants sat Eli Manning in favor of Kurt Warner. Eli Manning started 7 games as a rookie, so not really. I don't think any of us are expecting Dart to start week 1. We're just saying that he's going to start. Yeah. They drafted him in the first round. He's going to start. We just don't see. I think Mahomes is really the last guy who was
and that was a playoff team. I think Jake Locker was he was the last official first rounder that sat actually sat.
Sure. Yeah, it's rare, and it has to be on a playoff team, and pretty much, and this isn't going to be a playoff team.
Because the Mahomes and Trey Lance, those are 2 playoff teams that those unique situations that created those environments.
Yeah, and there's just no way this team is going to be good. The offensive line questions as part of it. Although it's possible the offensive line isn't as bad as it looked at times last year with Andrew Thomas. If he's fully healthy, maybe it looks a little bit better. But Rich, you brought up that stuff that we talked about early in the year about Dart against good defenses. So I went and pulled up those stats to share again. I mentioned earlier how he struggles with his downfield accuracy. That's the big red flag. And basically every competent defense that he faced last year completely took away the deep ball because he can't hit tight windows downfield. And it's also worth mentioning, yes, they play in the SEC, but because of the expanded schedules with Texas and Oklahoma joining the SEC, not every SEC schedule is really like the quote-unquote SEC schedule that we used to talk about. Ole Miss actually had a very easy schedule, more like an ACC kind of schedule with 1 or 2 good games. So Dart on throws of 20 or more yards downfield. Here's how he did against the best defenses he faced. Against Kentucky, he was 1 of 7. Against South Carolina, he was 2 of 9.
Georgia 1 of 3, against Florida 3 of 12. He was terrible throwing downfields, and they lost 2 of those games against worse teams, against Florida and Kentucky. They should have won those games, but Dart really, because they couldn't get anything going offensively, cost them the game. And he even had some bad games against bad defenses. Mississippi State was one of the worst power conference teams last year. He was 0 of 7 throwing downfield against them. So that's a concern. It'll help having Malik Neighbors, obviously, but that's only one guy, and the rest of the receiving core isn't there. I would expect next offseason to them, either in the draft or in free agency, to be really aggressive going out and getting another weapon, because with a quarterback like Dart who doesn't have elite accuracy, you got to have some dudes at receiver.
I can't imagine
definitely
a better fit for Jaxson Dart than Wando Robinson.
First of all,
those
this is
screen
Darius.
passes are going to really be fired the next season. But absolutely, Ryan, to your point, this is a team in the New York Giants that they're going to be throwing the ball short, underneath, quick. But if we saw the offensive coordinator, play caller scheme things up for him last season with Ole Miss, I mean, that's exactly what Brian Daboll is going to have to take over now doing as well. Figure out a way, just like he did with Daniel Jones in 2022, of hiding those warts, of hiding those pimples, because there are a lot of them, and figure out a way to try to minimize those bad parts and maximize the things that he does well. That's going to be Brian Daboll's job if he's going to want to keep a job himself next year.
So I'm going to push back on the Giants have no chance of competing part of this. Like the Giants roster, I've said this pretty consistently throughout the offseason as well. The offensive line is a problem, and that could just sink the whole thing. Quarterback play is a problem and can sink the whole thing. This offense, this roster is not that bad. I look, Darius Slayton, we talk about the wide receiver. Darius Slayton's a pretty good NFL wide receiver. I'm not saying he's great or anything. He's fine. He can get down the field, right? He's fine. We like their running back room. We like Tyrone Tracy. You look at their defense, and especially now that they're adding Abdul Carter to that defensive in group, you would still want to see them add more to the defensive line. But they added Paulson Adebo. We'll see kind of how he's going to play on the back end. They've got 2 good linebackers. They have Javon Holland and Tyler Nubin back there at safety. This defense isn't bad. This team is not as a bad enough team to have been picking at pick 3. This is one of those teams that I'm not saying they're going to win the division. They're in a really tough division, even if the Cowboys don't bounce back and all of this. But this is one of those teams that stuck out to me as we do these team needs series on the site. The Broncos were one that stuck out to me last year. This is one of those teams that stick out to me that say this team is not as bad as consensus seems to think they are. It can be sunk by offensive line if they don't fix it. And it can be sunk if just the quarterbacks aren't good enough. That's what happens to lots of NFL teams, right? But this roster top to bottom is not as bad as it seems like, at least in my opinion, the public seems to view it.
Well, they also have the number 1 toughest strength of schedule this upcoming season. So that's going to not help matters any. But to your point, yeah, they probably, if they had a quarterback, because they intentionally just sat Daniel Jones because they're like, we don't want to risk injury. We're not going anywhere this year. And so they're just rotating all these randos in there who should not be starting NFL games. So they ended up performing worse because the quarterback is so valuable, that position. And so if you stick a worse than replacement level guy out there, you are not going to have success. So they didn't, which is what makes it so frustrating that they had that first overall pick right there, and then they blew it. But I'm not going to live that down anytime soon. I thought that was the dumbest decision. If I'm the owner of the New York Giants, I am sitting Brian Daboll in the room. I'm sitting Joe Schoen in the room, heading into that Week 17 game once we have locked them up, and I'm saying, your jobs are secured if you lose these next 2 games. Figure it out. I'm not going to force your hand. You coach how you want to, but your jobs are secured if you lose these next 2 games. I would really love nothing more than to be parading around the number 1 overall draft pick over the next 4 months and letting you guys scout the rest of the class and not have to worry about that quarterback position. And at any rate.
So we had a couple picks come through with Tyleik Williams going to the Lions, eating more kneecaps there with the Lions. Then we have Josh Conerly going to the Commanders, which I think is a few 2 picks early for you. A couple picks early for you, Ryan, and where you had him. Unfortunately,
that is true. Do you get a 1 point for that though? That he went in the first round?
Yeah, it's still 1 point for having someone in the first round.
Okay,
Perfect.
so you and Brendan both had him. You had him at 31 to the Chiefs. Brendan had him 32 to the Eagles. It would have been lovely to make that hit. We did put that out on our mailing list, though, of Conerly going in the first round. What do you like about him, Ryan, in this fit where he's being drafted here by the Washington Commanders there at pick number 29?
Yeah, I mean, he's a work in progress, but he's a 21-year-old left tackle with, a decent amount of experience playing against good competition in the Pac-12 last year and the Big Ten this year. Like I was saying before, at the end of the first round here, we're not getting guys who have like fully stamped first round grades. So to get someone who's young, already having experience, career is trending in the right direction, I think it's a good pick. I assume that they're making this pick because they drafted – it was Brandon Coleman, right? Was that how they were playing last? Yeah, Brandon Coleman last year out of TCU. They got to see him a little bit, but maybe they're starting to think that this isn't. He's not going to be their long-term left tackle. Maybe he has a chance to stick at right tackle, but obviously they're thinking about Laramie Tunsil's only a short-term fix for them at left tackle. So I would expect Conerly to maybe compete for a right tackle job, maybe compete for a job at guard in the short term, but long term, I would think they're going to try to groom him as Tunsil's replacement.
Someone in the chat just asked, Henderson to KC, is that a thing? Any take there on that, Ryan?
That's a pretty exciting fit. Yeah, I mean, they have other needs, so I would be a little bit surprised. Obviously, they've proven capable of winning with just, a bunch of nobodies in the backfield. So I would question the choice from a team-building standpoint, but they want an explosive guy in the backfield who can catch passes, and he would be a Kareem Hunt-ish type of receiver for them. They're kind of different body types, but he could, as a receiver, he could be that type of guy for them. So it would be a really interesting addition to the offense.
First of all, just let Elijah Mitchell cook, please. That's what I'm looking for in 2025. I do want to get to this though. So we were focusing on the Vikings as that trade back spot, right? And then the Vikings make their pick, and then immediately we get 2 trades back. The reason we're focusing on the Vikings as that trade back spot was because they have 4 picks in this draft. They have the least draft capital heading into the draft. And they have a very good roster. Obviously, we'll see what happens. They're coming in with JJ McCarthy, but it's not a roster that's like devoid of needs. They have needs still for a team that's trying to compete in probably the best division in football. Like if we're looking at what the Giants paid, and especially what the Falcons paid, it's a little confusing to me that if that was on the table for the Vikings, which you would assume it would be for the Giants and Falcons trying to move up, why aren't the Vikings moving back there? Like it's a bit of a confusing decision.
I'll disagree with that a little bit because number one, I think Donovan Jackson is a legit first rounder. I'm a little higher on him than consensus. So like maybe I'm on a limb on that. But what he showed late last year when he was forced to shift over to left tackle, a position he hadn't played in a few years for Ohio State's playoff run, and to not just hold his own, but to dominate at left tackle going up against some really good teams through the playoff run, that boosted his stock for me dramatically because we already knew he was probably a first-round guard. But then to prove that he could also play left tackle at a high level, that stamped him as a legit first-rounder for me. And I think it makes a lot of sense. This is a bad class of interior offensive linemen all the way through. Like you are not getting a starter on day 2, more than likely. Maybe some people like Tate Ratledge as a guard. Like maybe you could get him, but you obviously can't bank on that happening. You can't plan on drafting a specific player on day 2, and you're breaking in basically a rookie quarterback next year. You better have a good run game. So you better make sure your blocking is good. You better be able to protect him. So being able to plug in a stud on the offensive line, which I think Donovan Jackson is, that makes a lot of sense to me. So I suspect their idea coming into this draft was if we can get a guy that we love in the first round that's going to help JJ McCarthy, we're going to do that. And if not, we know that we can trade back because there's going to be some teams that want to move up. So I think that's probably what happened was they were happy with Jackson and what he's going to contribute both immediately and long term. And so it's worth it because the extra picks that you're going to pick up later in this draft, like this is a bad draft class all the way through. It's not just that we're lacking first rounders. There's a bunch of teams who are in trade discussions are talking about they want 2026 picks. They don't really care about getting picks this year because they don't think they're getting anybody come, once we're outside the top 100, they're just not interested in those players at all, really. So I suspect that's what the Vikings were thinking.
Speaking of interior offensive linemen, Ryan, we're probably going to have to interrupt you to announce the Buffalo Bills pick momentarily, but talk to us about Tyler Booker going to the Dallas Cowboys there at pick number 12. I know that was something that we were thinking about, that the Cowboys, a sleeper need for them was going to be offensive line, but where everybody was like assembling the tea leaves was to go with a wide receiver. And they had their pick of wide receivers there. They could have gone with a wide receiver at pick number 12. And they decided not to go with Golden or Egbuka, and they decided to go with the guard. What do you make of Tyler Booker as a prospect, and do you like the fit there in Dallas?
Yeah, I have kind of mixed feelings about it because I don't love him as a prospect, but I think Ashton, Jeanty, and Tet McMillan were the two guys that we thought would have been like home run picks for the Cowboys. Obvious combination of need and value, and obviously they were off the board. And so Dallas tends to be one of the teams that just sits and takes the best available player. I disagree that Booker is the best available player there, but I can see how a team might come to that conclusion in a bad draft class like this, because Booker is another guy who has, had rave reviews from the interview process. He's one of the guys in this class that you can count on to be a leader in the locker room, count on his effort. He's not going to be a bust, barring injury. He's not going to be a bust. He's going to be a starter for you for the next few years. And so Dallas maybe looked at it like that. Like, this is a very safe double. Like, he's just going to come in. He's going to be a starter. Maybe he's not going to be an all-pro. He probably won't, but he's going to be a good starter. And in this draft class, your other options there are, you could take a risk. You could take somebody like Jalen Walker, Walter Nolan, like those could come in and play right away. But they're riskier picks than Booker, who is almost certainly going to be a starter. The one big problem I have with it is that if you just wanted to hit a double and just go get the best available player, take Tyler Warren. You took the wrong Tyler. Like, go get Tyler Warren. Yeah, tight end's not an obvious need, but it is a big upgrade to get Tyler Warren into that offense. Like, that would have been a home run pick, even though it's not a need, because you could absolutely sell that to me as it's just the best available player. So I have a hard time with calling Booker the best available player when there was somebody else obviously more talented on the board for them.
All right, we just got Maxwell Hairston selected by the Buffalo Bills, so that gives you another point, Ryan. You had him going in this round. And then, surprisingly, the Philadelphia Eagles make a one-move trade up. They trade from 32 to 31 with the team that they just defeated in the Super Bowl with the Kansas City Chiefs. What is the logic there, just to ensure that nobody else jumps ahead of you, I assume, so that the Chiefs can't trade with anybody else? You don't have to give up much capital, but you're going to ensure that nobody else is going to leap into the back part of the first round and take the player that you're interested in taking. Is that kind of what we're thinking, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably what happens. Usually when teams are calling to trade up, the team that owns that pick is like, well, you got to tell us who you're taking first, because if it's the guy that we want, we want him. So my guess is what happened is somebody called Philly at 32 and was like, hey, we want to move up in the first round. Here's who we want. And they're like, we want that guy. We better get on the phone with Kansas City to make sure that they don't jump us to take him. So that when a weird trade like that happens, that's probably how it played out.
So basically they lost round 5, pick 164 overall. And that's the compensation, is they're swapping picks, but the Eagles also give the Chiefs pick 164. So we'll see who the Philadelphia Eagles did not want to give up pick 32 and who they were looking to go after. I'm curious if it's going to be Mason Taylor. That's a pick that you had positioned there at the end of the first round. So we'll see if somebody wanted to come for a tight end or if somebody was coming up for somebody else of a little bit more value.
I'm interested. You had Maxwell Hairston in the first round, Ryan. I don't actually remember where he was on your big board. I think this was definitely a need for Buffalo behind Benford and Taron Johnson. They had like Tre'Davious White was back, Dane Jackson. Like they brought guys back that are not coming off, older guys not coming off great seasons. I see safety as maybe a bigger need for them, but we'll see kind of where they go with that. with that later. But did you have him in the first round just because you thought he would go in the first round, or is this a guy you like going to the Bills?
I think it's a little bit of a reach. I have him in the first round just because the traits kind of point to that. Like, teams want fast cornerbacks, specifically guys who test well in agility and have like the fast 10-yard splits. He checked those boxes. So I figured in a draft class like this, somebody who at least has the traits, even if the production isn't there, is probably going to go in the first round. It's interesting that he goes to Buffalo, though, because I think you could make a pretty good comparison to Tre'Davious White, and he's going to get a chance to play with him. Like, kind of the smaller, skinnier cornerback, but really athletic, just kind of has that skill, the raw skills to just play backyard football and stick to you. He wasn't nearly as productive in college as Tre'Davious White was at LSU. So that's why I'm a little bit lower on him. I'd like to see more production from a cornerback because, in college, you are kind of playing backyard football a lot. Like, you should be able, if you've got those athletic traits, you should be able to stick to a college wide receiver most of the time, even if you're taking some false steps along the way. And Hairston didn't do that as consistently. So I have some doubts, but the traits are definitely there. So I understand why you could talk yourself into taking him in the first round when, anybody you're drafting at this point is a risk.
So we just got the pick 31. The Philadelphia Eagles drafted Jihad Campbell, linebacker out of Alabama. Now that gives both you and Ryan a 1-point score on that one as well. But talk to us about why you think the Philadelphia Eagles were coveting Jihad there at 31 and did not want to sacrifice the ability to draft him and made the move with the Kansas City Chiefs.
Probably just the best available player approach for them. If he were not injured, he probably would have been off the board already. I think there were some teams that had him potentially removed from their board altogether because of a few different injuries. But definitely some teams that were bumping him down a little bit, viewing him as a day 2 pick because they didn't want to risk it. It sounds like whether or not he's going to be ready for the beginning of the season is kind of up in the air. But, Philly has depth, so that's not really a concern. And they've been a team that's taken gambles on players with injury concerns. Nakobe Dean, just a few years ago from Georgia, who slid, he was viewed as a first-round talent who slid, I think, to the 3rd round, and they ended up taking gambles. So they're, this happens every year. Like, they sit, and the Ravens and Eagles are the two teams that just kind of sit and take someone who's sliding down the board for whatever reason. This year it's an injury concern. So that's just their strategy. They'll take the gambles, and they just figure, stockpile enough of those gambles, some of them are going to pan out.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Dean because he suffered a serious knee injury in the playoffs, right? And so I think it was a torn patellar tendon, if I'm remembering correctly. And so that could sideline him for a long time. He's also in the final year of his deal. And so, like you said, now they're adding Jihad Campbell, and that's good. They have Jeremiah Trotter there. They that is one of the positions where you look at and you go, I don't know where we are because of that Dean injury. They brought back Zach Bond. And so there's some stuff there, and they'll figure it out for sure. But yeah, that Dean injury really changed, I think, the landscape here for what they were trying to do. Do you I don't know what you've heard. How realistic is it that Campbell's actually going to miss into the regular season? Does that seem like even a likely or the most likely outcome?
I'm not sure because it sounds like there have been kind of conflicting reports because it's multiple injuries. So I think it's one of those things that was sort of like a team by team basis. Different team doctors had different recommendations. It doesn't sound like it's any sort of career altering thing though. So I think that's probably why the Eagles took the risk, is that they feel like, hey, we've already got a Super Bowl roster. Like, we can, even if he's not going to start, we're going to the playoffs again. So if he's healthy for the playoffs, he'll contribute. He's also a really interesting piece because he has played on the edge a little bit. I believe in high school, he played a lot on the edge. And then he played a little bit more of linebacker in college, the traditional off-ball linebacker role. So you can move him around a little bit. So while Dean is injured, maybe he plays a little bit more there, or at least competes with Trotter for those opportunities. I kind of question his ability to start in the middle right away. I know there were some concerns brought up that maybe he's not the kind of guy that you want as your green dot on defense. So plugging him into that kind of role right off the bat as a rookie is probably not going to happen, even if he's healthy enough. But come playoff time, especially if Dean is able to become healthy by then, and he just becomes sort of if Campbell becomes a weapon that you can move around, use him at linebacker, use him at the edge, that's potentially a really interesting chess piece for them to be able to roll out there in the playoffs.
Do y'all think that the Chiefs wanted to trade back because they feel the most comfortable picking 32nd. Is that where we are? I mean, I don't know how much success they've had in that spot. In fact, one of the needs that they have is because of I believe a failed 32nd pick with Felix. Last name I've now forgotten how to say. What was his name, Ryan? I've now forgotten it.
I'm forgetting how to pronounce it as well.
that's the level of
that's how much of a bust
success we've had. That's the level of success we've had to this point there. But yeah, we're waiting on Kansas City. That'll be the last pick here. It'd be interesting to see where they go. Obviously, offensive line is something we saw. I am interested. I mean, they're obviously not taking Shedeur Sanders unless we see a trade back here. We're officially going to see Shedeur Sanders fall out of the first round. And I guess the question becomes, where does this end? Right, Ryan's going to do a day 2 mock for the site, and so we'll see kind of where he thinks Sanders is going to go. But we're looking at the same names or similar names at the top of the first round. Obviously, the Giants have now moved up. Like where is this ending for Shedeur Sanders, and kind of what does this mean, I guess, for his future? Any thoughts?
Well, because of the Browns trade, they now have an extra pick. So they're picking 33rd and 36th. And we know that there's been some reports that they like Shedeur Sanders. I think the fact that they have an extra second-round pick makes it a lot easier to draft him. Because if you were to draft him with only 1 second-round pick, you're kind of punting on that pick, right? Because you've already got Flacco is going to start most of your games for you. They've got a decent backup. It's a lot easier to draft him knowing that he's only going to start a couple of games for you when you've got another second-round pick that you can play in, because the Browns have a lot of holes. But who knows? Like, we also heard a lot of reports that the Steelers like him, but they don't have a second-round pick, so they're not in the mix for Shedeur Sanders at all at this point, unless they were to pull off a pretty significant trade. But they'd have to give up a pretty big package to move up for a quarterback that they obviously didn't like that much because they passed over him already. So I don't know. He could slide a little bit.
So we're looking at second round pick history. We've got Ritter. We've got no, not Ritter. Ritter went in the third round. We've got Levis here. We've got Kyle Trask. Like what are we talking about here in second round history? Like I know you like him, but like with the fall that we're seeing here, like it's got to be concerning if you're a Shedeur Sanders supporter, given what we know of second round picks, what we've kind of seen happen to them, the chances they don't get, the fact that he takes sacks, and that's something that NFL coaches are probably not going to like. Like overall, obviously, this is just, he would have wanted to be a first round pick, but even when we're projecting forward, like this really makes it a much tougher road for him, just based simply on draft capital and the chances he's going to get.
Yeah, I mean, the primary reason why second-round quarterbacks fail is that it's so easy to move on from them. They're just not given an opportunity. Like the league as a whole does not develop quarterbacks. It does not happen. And on the rare case that it does happen, like we've seen a few in recent years, Sam Darnold and Geno Smith, they kind of develop themselves. Like you can't really point to any one team and saying like, yeah, good job developing them. Like, no, they put in the work themselves through many, many coaching staffs and eventually figured it out. And, I also do want to say, like, I'm the Shedeur Sanders supporter because he's number one quarterback on my board. I had all of these quarterbacks outside of my top 32 picks. So I don't think any of them are going to be long-term starters in the league. Otherwise, I would have graded them much higher. I just think this is a bad quarterback class overall. I see a path to Sanders, Dart, or Ward panning out. I see a path to Will Howard panning out. Maybe even Jalen Milroe, the ceiling's super high there. Like all of these guys have enough traits that they're interesting day 2 picks, but history tells us that no one's going to give them more than a handful of starts for them to work it out, and they're probably going to be kicked to the curb in 2 years, regardless of where they land.
So while we get to conclude the first round, it is Josh Simmons, offensive lineman, going to the Kansas City Chiefs from Ohio State. I'm looking at your board. I don't know that I see Simmons on here, Ryan. Oh, I do.
Yeah, I had Simmons in the first round.
You had him in the first round going 16 to the Cardinals, but that doesn't matter. You still get a point for that. So excellent job. We'll see where everything nets out. I really feel like I was really curious doing the show with you because I didn't do it last year, how your stress level would be, because I know how seriously you take this. So you were surprisingly calm, but that doesn't surprise. I guess it doesn't surprise me that much because outwardly you do have a generally calm demeanor, very level-headed. But certainly, I'm sure you're going to be breathing a sigh of relief and trying to figure out how your score compares to everybody else's now that the first round is concluded. Any quick reaction, though, being Ohio State fan that you are, of Josh Simmons as a prospect and then his fit with the Kansas City Chiefs?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great pick by the Chiefs. It's a risk because he's another one of these injury guys. He's on the board because of injury, but he's also only on the board because of injury. He would have been a first-round pick. And, in fact, if he were fully healthy, the Patriots are taking him 4th overall. I feel pretty confident saying that. Like he was widely viewed as the best offensive tackle in this class by a margin at the beginning of the year. Now, he only played about half the season. He got injured in the first Ohio State-Oregon game. So we didn't see him against Ohio State's best competition. So it's like sort of clouds the picture a little bit because the previous year, he didn't necessarily look like a top 10 lock, but he was a dominant force through the first half of Ohio State's season this year, and to the point where he was the consensus number 1 tackle. So Kansas City potentially gets the steal of the first round with this pick. Now, the injury is a concern. It likely affects his availability early this season. But for Kansas City, I think that they've got one of the best offensive line coaches in the league. It's a great spot for Simmons to land for a guy who already was on such a good trajectory as far as how his growth was happening at Ohio State. They also really like length in their offensive linemen. No one in this class really had the traditional length that Kansas City looks for, but Simmons is at least close. So I think they feel pretty good about the fact that they were able to get one of the few offensive linemen who all basically fits the combination of traits that they look for in an offensive lineman, potentially at a great discount because of the injury.
So let's reset a little bit. We've got the first round over. We're definitely going to hit on kind of just some overarching thoughts, but I want to make sure we go back and hit on some of the stuff that happened before we went live. We talked a little bit about the the Browns and Jaguars trade. We didn't get to talk enough about Travis Hunter. I don't think. Rich, I think the fantasy conversation about Travis Hunter it's very interesting because of this uncertainty about what are we actually going to get from him as a receiver. But I thought you had a really interesting point in your write-up for him about, this guy's really good. What if he just plays receiver and we're all going to miss out because of the uncertainty? And I think that, looking at it from that perspective is at least interesting, especially given the landing spot and what the Jaguars needed here at, in this draft.
Yeah, we'll get into the fantasy stuff more on Monday, but it's pretty clear that given what the Jaguars given up, that, Travis Hunter is going to be a two-way player and is significant. They need he has to be almost an all-pro at both positions to even justify the amount of capital that they gave up to acquire him. But also, I've been always throughout the entire process just open to the idea of what if he does play both ways way more than anyone projects him? Just because we haven't seen it happen doesn't mean it can't happen. He could just be that unique of a player. Granted, football players get hurt on a limited amount of snaps, but those are things you can't project. So that's always been an open. Think about this. He won the Heisman Trophy. Well, first of all, he was the number 1 recruit coming out of high school. Went to Jackson State, obviously was the first player to go to non-D1 school. That was the highest recruit in the country. But last year, he wins the Heisman Trophy. He wins the Blitnikoff Award for the best wide receiver in the country. And then he wins the award for best defensive player in the year. We've never seen it before. We've just never seen a player like this before. So when a player has shown you that didn't even go to wide receiver meetings, he could retain a full playbook on both sides of the ball and just has that natural amount of talent to just play both positions, why not just stock that and say hey, what if he is a unicorn? What if he is a 1-on-1? Now, what if I given all that much capital? That's a different conversation, but he is going to play wide receiver. And when you look at him in Liam Cohen's offense, where he distributes the football near the line of scrimmage, Travis Hunter is awesome with the football in his hands. If you're giving him Chris Godwin targets near the line of scrimmage, which Pat Shurmur built in a lot of, screens into the Colorado offense, even though Travis Hunter won downfield as well, he can come in and immediately do that. So I think that this fit is absolutely, significant, a boom for his, fantasy stock in general, because players that go this high, you just invest in those type of players, especially players that have shown you they're this good of a football player on their own. Especially when you think about like our fantasy ledgers over the years, like we've taken guys like Treylon Burks, like a N'Keal Harry, like in top 5 rookie picks. Like these guys even came close to the amount of pedigree that Travis Hunter's had, in his tenure. So, I think it's a pretty no-brainer that he's still a guy that you want to invest in.
First of all, this guy didn't, and I like to stand on the Treylon Burks. I like to stand on the Treylon Burks being right turn. I've taken enough bad players. Don't worry. Don't you worry about that. But Treylon Burks, I got that one right. Sorry, Pat Carane. But I also want to point out one thing on the Travis Hunter thing. The pick, and you made this point, Ryan, and you were right up, like you said in your mock, you write up a bunch of different players and kind of what could be there. And you made the mention of Hunter is that he fills 2 really big needs. If they're going to planning to use him in this way, he fills, like we had both of their top 2 needs as a defensive back and wide receiver. Obviously he's helping out in both those spots. And so if they actually plan to use him this way, and he's going to fill both of those spots, then that really starts to justify the trade more if that works out.
Yeah. I mean, if he's really going to be a stud at both positions, that justifies the trade. He could be in the short term. Like he did it at Colorado, like every single week he was going out there and he was playing more snaps on a week-to-week basis than he will have to in the NFL. His college games typically have more snaps, even with the adjusted college rules. So he can do it, at least right now. Can he do it when he is 24, 25, 26? I don't know. I also have some questions. Like the fact that they were so aggressive, it does kind of make me think that they probably view him a little bit more as a wide receiver because teams tend to value that position a little bit more. And I don't see him as being an elite wide receiver. If he were just a wide receiver, I would grade him as a first rounder, but I would view him more as like kind of in like the Jerry Jeudy mold as a prospect. Jeudy hasn't quite hit that ceiling. So like, I don't mean that to sound insulting. I thought Jerry Jeudy was a first rounder. As a quarterback, I think he's an absolute stud and he would be my number 1 overall prospect if he were only a cornerback. He was that good. I would much rather see him play cornerback, but the way they invested in him, I have doubts. If they're long-term, if they're going to use him at receiver, I think that he's had this label, like Rich was saying, of being this like great after the catch guy. And I think that that's been skewed a little bit based on the offense. Cause Rich, like you were saying, like Pat Shurmur, he knew he had to find a way to generate easy touches for his receivers because the offensive line was so bad. So they did a lot of those screen passes, quick passes. And so like he did produce after the catch, but I love using the stat with receivers, the route adjusted yards after catch, because if you catch a lot of screen passes, you're going to have a lot of yards after catch, right? Like that's the whole point of the play. But if you look at a player's yards after catch relative to the routes he ran on his receptions, you can kind of see like, okay, is he actually producing above average? Hunter's 2 years at Colorado, he was below average in route adjusted yards after catch both season, 17% below average over the 2 years combined. He's not really like one of those dudes that you just got to get the ball in his hands. He's a very good route runner. He has great hands. I think he can be productive in other ways, but he's not really, like, he's not a big downfield receiver that you can just like throw the ball downfield and he'll just go up and get it. Like he doesn't have that kind of size. He's not a crazy dynamic weapon after the catch. He's just kind of all around good. And so that's why I think that, if he were just a receiver and someone picked him, 20th overall, I'd be like, yeah, he'll be a good number 2. I don't think he's the dynamic weapon in terms of like his after catch ability, his downfield, his size, his ability to win contested catches. I don't see him as that kind of guy. So if that's the Jaguars' long-term plan, and the amount that they invested in him tells me that they're probably leaning that direction. If they had to pick one side of the ball or the other, that's my concern. I don't know that he's going to be the dude that they want him to be.
I don't think that's the case though, because they took that guy in the first round last year. Like
that's true. He doesn't have to be, but
yeah, he's playing alongside Brian Thomas Jr. The investment, and that's a separate conversation, right? Yeah. Like what they gave up. But I mean, I think the pairing of those two absolutely makes a lot of sense, because Brian Thomas Jr. is that big body, Yeah, so like I think that mesh actually makes a lot more sense. Whereas like you could try to question like, all right, well they have Brian Thomas Jr. What kind of targets are open there? And there's a wealth of targets open there. We saw it was just Brian Thomas Jr. the final third of the season. They didn't have Evan Ingram, they didn't have Christian Kirk, they didn't have Gabe Davis that final leg of the season, and we're not going to see Brian Thomas Jr. get a 35% target share. Like that was never going to happen over the full course of the season. So there are targets for him to get and coexist alongside of him. I do worry a sense from like the ceiling perspective, like you kind of said, because we have seen a lot of these situations, and I put it in the article, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase absolutely impacted him from terms of like a ceiling, became more of like a volatile wide receiver too for fantasy purposes. Devontae Smith, they add AJ Brown. Same thing in that stance. Jalen Waddle with Tyreek Hill. So is that a situation that turns Hunter into like that volatile wide receiver 2 type play? Playing alongside like an actual alpha that is Brian Thomas.
The other thing too is this Jacksonville Jaguars team, 32 in pass defense, 32 in yards per attempt allowed, 32 in explosive pass rate. They were desperately needing to get some help there at the cornerback position. And you don't have to use him. I mean, again, we don't need to dive deeply into how many snaps or how long throughout the course of the season could he be playing on the offensive side of the ball, packages or deeper into the game plan. But as long as you're putting him out there a little bit, then guess what opposing teams are going to have to do? They're going to have to prepare for you when your defense has him out there on the field because he's a full-time defensive player. So offensively, it's going to hurt the other team. But then you're going to have to scheme up defensively. What are we going to do when he's out there? And you're going to still have to practice against it. It's just like almost like going up against, maybe is a bad analogy, but going up against a team that played the Wildcat. You still have to defend and try to figure out how to every single week defend when they go into the Wildcat package. They might end up not using the Wildcat very much at all that particular week. And now you just wasted a lot of your prep time for nothing. Or they might use the Wildcat a ton and you better be ready for it defensively. So it is going to bring something to Liam Cohen and their ability to kind of make other teams question at all times, like what are they going to be trotting out there on the field? Rich, I wanted to get your quick take. I know you write up everything from the fantasy side of things. You're the savant on that side of the football. Last 10 picks of the draft, not a single skill player went. We had no wide receivers. No, Matthew Golden was the last one at pick number 23. We had all the tight ends were gone before then that went in the first round, all the wide receivers. So you do have to write up Jaxson Dart, I guess, but from a receiver, running back, tight end position, nobody there at the end of the draft. All these teams that were playoff teams last year that had success last year, they were going for those bigger bodies, the offensive line, defensive line for the most part, or drafting guys like Ryan was indicating. They sort of had some red flags from an injury perspective where the Eagles and the Chiefs could afford, hey, if this guy's not ready at the beginning of the season, that's no problem for us. We've got other players that are in position there. And we kind of were planning what we thought this first round would look like from a, who's going to go. And it was almost like we joke like Noah's Ark 2 by 2. We're going to have maybe 2 running backs, maybe 2 to 3 wide receivers, maybe 2 quarterbacks, maybe 2 tight ends. And that's pretty much exactly what we got off the board. From a skill position side of things, Rich, just big picture before we got to walk through a few more of these individual players. And I guess maybe my biggest one would be the Loveland, Tyler Warren, one going before the other. We were mostly expecting Warren to go first. Any surprises there for you, Rich, from the skill position perspective here as you studied all of these prospects leading into the draft?
No, and I think paired with where the strengths of this draft were, in the offensive line, defensive line, and we wrote up the team needs. We talked ad nauseum about just how many teams needed offensive line depth, especially with the NFL going to 17 games, just how hard it's been able to keep, offensive line continuity together. And we knew kind of that it was going to be Tet, removing Travis Hunter from the conversation. We kind of knew it was going to be Tet, Egbuka, and Golden were like the 3 wide receivers that the NFL was relatively high on, and then the rest was a mystery. I mean, day 2, I don't even know like what kind of order we're going to see him go in. Like the rest of the guys, that's what's going to be fun because you could totally pick your flavor of like remaining wide receivers, and teams are going to tell us where they valued these guys and who they valued highly for their schemes, compared to others, because it's a hodgepodge of guys. The running back position, we might have been able to have one more guy. We saw Trevian Henderson get some steam. He ended up not going, but it is a running back rich draft class. So teams maybe say like, hey, we're going to, front load, use our picks on offensive linemen, defensive linemen early on because we know running backs going to be available later. So kind of par for the course, I think, in the names that went off the board. I think this is exactly what we were expecting. Maybe we were going to see like Trevion Henderson sneak in or maybe another wide receiver, but that just didn't play out.
So momentarily, we're going to run through some of our favorite picks, some of the picks that surprised us, some of the head scratchers, some of the picks that we thought had some good value or had some poor value. But first, I do want to mention for all the new listeners out there, this is the time of year we get a lot of new people coming into the show, coming into the chat, following us on X and those sort of social platforms. I want to remind you, we have a free newsletter and we're running a couple of specials on that newsletter. It's free to sign up. Stay up to date with all of our latest content. Just go to sharp.football, type that into your browser, and there you can sign up for the free newsletter. And we are giving away a free NFL futures package to someone who signs up for the newsletter before the end of the draft. The futures package, which is like all our bets that we expect to happen over the course of the season, we share them pretty much from May through beginning of September, and then boom, the season kicks off. Last year, we generated 20.9 positions of profit, hit a 64% win rate on non-long shot bets, a $100 better. If you're betting $100 as your standard unit bet, you won over $2,000 betting our NFL futures last year. It was a great year for that. We're going to give away one of those packages absolutely for free. And you don't have to do anything except for sign up for the free newsletter. So head over to sharp.football and sign up for the free newsletter there. Ray, what do we want to hit here before we start going into the best and worst?
I have one for you that I'm very interested in kind of how you feel about it, which is Ashton Jeanty to the Raiders. And the reason I wanted to ask you about it is because I have very similar feelings to this as I did to the Geno Smith trade, which my question is, can the Raiders compete in this division? And my guess is I don't think so. I don't really think they're competing, but are they better after they drafted Ashton Jeanty? Yes, because their running game was awful last season. Are they better after they traded for Geno Smith? I certainly think they are. But then I look at these. So like these moves made them better. I feel pretty confident that they're a better team and a better offense than they were. But like I really fall into the does it matter camp with them for both of these, and like going out and getting, Ashton Jeanty. I don't really know if it matters. I know we've got Pete Carroll there. He's going to want to win, but what are we doing is kind of my question here for this team. I wanted your thoughts on it.
Yeah. I am no Ryan McCrystal here. So I am not a crystal ball reader of the draft and what these GMs do. But as I was breaking this down, I'm looking at their GM. It's a new GM, John Spytek. He was the assistant general manager for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 2023 and in 2024, and was critical with them in player personnel with the Bucs since like 2016. What did the Tampa Bay Buccaneers do just last year? They drafted an offensive lineman in round 1, and then they came back in round 4 and drafted a guy by the name of Bucky Irving, who, Ray, you were the one who encouraged us to bet him to have the most rushing yards of any rookie running back, even though he was a 4th-round pick and an extreme long shot as part of the futures package. And we crushed, what was that, 23-1, 24-1 odds that we hit on that last season. So, and then the year before that, he drafted an offensive lineman in round 2, Luke Gadecki, and then came back in round 3 and drafted Rashard White, the running back. I'm sorry, that was in 2022, 2 years prior to that. They also drafted Tristan Wirfs in round 1 in 2020 and came back in round 3 and drafted Keyshawn Vaughn in round 3. So I was looking at this guy's history, okay? And that's why I was assuming that it's very logical with the depth of this running back class. Everybody's been talking about it ad nauseum for months now, that you go after that stud offensive lineman and then you can come back and backfill in one of these running backs. And that's exactly what Spytek had done for years in Tampa Bay. So I was very surprised. And the only thing that I thought as the logical reason for them to go in this direction was twofold. Number one, the skill set of Ashton Jeanty, and just they thought that this was a freak at the position, and they thought they viewed him totally differently than they did any of the other running backs in this class, and they just felt like if they had the opportunity to go get him. And then secondly, that opportunity presented itself. They didn't have to move up to do anything. He just fell into their lap, and he didn't have to fall that far. I think all of the mocks were expecting Jeanty to go number 5 to the Jacksonville Jaguars after like 2 or 3 days ago when the Jaguars news came out that they're going to go offensive skill player. They're going to go somebody on the offensive side of the ball. They're going to be drafting something. They're going to be doing something big, but they're going to be going on the offensive side of the ball. And obviously that didn't end up being correct. There was the Jacksonville Jaguars were that team that didn't bring anybody in. They were trying to be very secretive about what they were doing, taking after the LA Rams, which is where the Jaguar general manager comes from. So they didn't want to be secretive, and they wanted to be secretive, and ended up paying off for them. They ended up moving up and getting the player that they wanted. It wasn't an offensive player. He will play offense. It was the unicorn Travis Hunter. Once that happened, I feel like that opened up the door then that we weren't thinking that the Cleveland Browns would be taking a running back there at 5, and it allowed the Raiders to have Jeanty fall right into their lap. So to your overarching question as to what do we think it's going to do for their team, 100% agree with everything you said, Ray. It's going to make them better. They're going to be more formidable. They're going to probably be able to possess the football a little bit more, run the clock a little bit better because they're running the football. And so those plays chew up a little bit more time. And maybe they're thinking that's going to help them against Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert, who are in that same division. And so it's not like selecting Ashton Jeanty makes the team worse. But what is the long-term team building philosophy there? Are you better off? And this is one of those, what was it? I forget the offensive lineman. It was draft an offensive lineman and throw the ball to anybody, or throw the ball to Jamar Chase. Penei Sewell, right. That big meme that was going back and forth. It's kind of the same question here. Do you go and draft that stud offensive lineman and run the ball with a 4th rounder like Bucky Irving, or do you draft Ashton Jeanty and run behind worse offensive linemen? And we know this offensive line, Ryan just told us, this offensive line draft was very weak after the top of the class.
I also want to say that we're an hour and 26 minutes into this, and we haven't talked about the number 1 overall pick, Cam Ward, which seems like a mistake. But it also is, we had the article of Cam Ward going to the Titans ready to go before 3 hours before the draft. Like everybody knew what was happening, but I still think it's really important, Ryan, to give your thoughts on this pick and kind of what the Titans are getting here with Cam Ward.
Yeah, it's a big swing. I mean, I can see why you could talk yourself into Cam Ward being the number 1 overall pick, because if you pick out his highlights, you can see the potential for a really high level quarterback. Like, you can put together a highlight package where he looks a little bit like Patrick Mahomes, which is what you're hoping you get. The question I've always had with him is that a lot of those highlights, especially late in games, he made a name for himself last year with some big 4th quarter comebacks. But what never gets talked about is the reason those 4th quarter comebacks were necessary was because of how poorly he played in the first half of those games. He is reckless. That's the best way I can describe him. And sometimes that leads to great highlights, and sometimes that leads to just completely nonsensical throws across the middle of the field that turn into easy pick sixes. And so the biggest challenge Tennessee now has is, can you coach that out of him? You've got to be able to coach those like 3 or 4 just mind-numbing mistakes out of him so that it becomes something that only shows up, maybe once every other game as opposed to multiple times in every game. Because obviously NFL defenses, if he keeps doing that at the rate he did in college, NFL defenses are going to make him pay for it at an even higher rate. So that's now Tennessee's job, is to force him to eliminate those plays. If you can, he's going to be a good starting quarterback. If you can't, he's a bust. I think it's really that simple.
Yeah, I mean, it's the Titans. They had to go in and make this move, right? Like this is where they are. But that aspect, that kind of big play, like we kind of had that a bit with Will Levis, right? Like, so like, where are we going with this? Although I will say, Rich, you had some points in your write-up there about Cam Ward that maybe some of that is overblown a little bit. Obviously he gets into hero mode and we can see those plays happen, but that when you kind of mentioning Jameis Winston, as we talked about earlier, our famous player, Jameis Winston, he's not really in that bucket, right? Like that's not what we're talking about, at least from collegiate production perspective.
No, I had him, objectively, and I don't, I'm no QB scout, and for one, Cam Ward falls into a bucket where he's probably not going to run enough to like really be like a significant, difference maker in fantasy circles, anyways, outside of two QB formats. You're hoping that you can get a pristine run out like we had from CJ Stroud or Justin Herbert early in their careers, but that's also a telltale like warning sign of like that's still a volatile archetype for fantasy production. But I did have like an objective grade on him that was similar to like Drake May last year. And, obviously that worked out. Drake May's a little more mobile and more running, but like it was kind of like if you were to congeal kind of all these draft classes, I think I still would have had like Ward higher than Michael Penix, and, higher than Bo Nix. And, Bo Nix is another guy that worked out. So I did think he felt like in that kind of range. And we put them in, if you would have put any of those guys in this draft class, they would have gone in that spot too. So I kind of get like how it all just kind of came together for Cam Ward, paired with the, no one really liking any of these other guys outside of, the Giants coming back to get Jaxson Dart at 25.
So I guess it's time now that we've gotten Cam Ward.
One quick point on just closing the loop on Cam Ward here. One of the things that I noted from Rich's write-up on what the Tennessee Titans were doing when he was writing up that offensive quarterback room, 46% of the Titans' third down passes the last 3 years resulted in them losing one EPA, one expected point on 46% of their third down passes over a 3-year span. That was obviously worst in the NFL. They also took a sack or threw an interception on nearly 20% of those plays, which was also worst in the NFL. So at a minimum, Cam Ward did a very good job of being able to avoid sacks. I think it was in Ryan's write-up or maybe it was in Rich's that Cam does hold on to the ball a little bit too much when he's under pressure, something that he has to do a little bit better. But at least he was slippery enough and had some escapability to avoid those back-breaking sacks, which we know just absolutely kill drives. And so that third down variance has gone against the Tennessee Titans for several years now due to their just absolutely horrific quarterback play on those key downs. Maybe Cam Ward, maybe he doesn't start, in week one, year one of being elite on third downs, but definitely going to have a higher ceiling than what they were getting previously.
All right, let's wrap this up. I think we should probably I'm going to leave it open to you guys if we're hitting favorite pick, least favorite pick, biggest storyline. What stood out to you? Like, what are you taking away here from this first round, Ryan, that really stands out to you as we sit here in the afterglow?
I guess if we want to talk about surprises, the big one to me that we haven't really talked about is Colston Loveland being the first tight end off the board.
Yeah.
That was a really big swing by the Bears. I mean, I talked about Warren a little bit when we were talking about the Cowboys and how I was surprised that if they wanted to go best available, they didn't just go Warren. Kind of the same thing with the Bears. Like, obviously, it absolutely makes sense to go out and get another weapon for Caleb Williams. You've got to support your young quarterbacks with as many weapons as you can. So I understand. And if Warren weren't in this draft class, I'd probably be perfectly okay with that pick. But Warren is such a rare tight end prospect, not only in the way that he affects the game in so many different ways, like we saw at Penn State, but he's so well polished. Tight ends often don't have a very smooth transition to the league. Warren feels like the kind of guy who's going to come in and play right away and contribute as a 3-down tight end. I don't think Loveland's going to be that guy. Now, Ben Johnson, we all think highly of him. I'm sure he's going to find some creative ways to incorporate him into the offense. And they do have Cole Kmet, who can maybe take on some of the responsibilities that Loveland isn't ready for. But it feels like too much of a risk when you had a tight end and Warren's just sitting there, tailor-made to contribute in that offense. That to go for the guy who maybe has higher upside because he's probably a better athlete, but obviously has a much lower floor too because he's not as well developed. It was a strange selection given what was available to them.
What about you, Rich? What's standing out to you there?
I talked about it on our show. I thought Loveland had a real good chance to go ahead of Warren. I thought NFL teams were going to value Loveland being a lot more projectable player than Warren. I mean, Warren, the best things about him were some things that are, I think, hard to translate for a tight end in the NFL. Like, you just don't run your offense that way. The way Penn State, like NFL offenses just don't run that way. So it's like, he was kind of a gift and a curse, like what Tyler Warren did. I mean, he wasn't going to come into an NFL offense and probably have a team probably was saying like, all right, are we going to, you know, force feed him this many targets near the line of scrimmage? Is that how we want our offense to run? So I just thought some teams would value like Loveland from a projectable stance, saying like, this is a more traditional player. We know what we have here, and that some teams might actually vault him up. And it turns out that Ben Johnson or Ryan Poles, I don't know who really made that call, had them, had that call, like had them over, you know, had Loveland's traits over what they wanted to run their offense with Warren. Also, like Warren, I don't think Warren would have really gelled with Caleb either. Like, I don't think that Warren is the kind of player that really meshes well, you know, with Caleb. You know, Caleb's a guy that wants to extend plays. He doesn't really push the ball, you know, near the line of scrimmage. We saw them try to do that when Thomas Brown took over at the end of last year, and that's just not really Caleb's game. So it could be more of just a better fit. You know, we'll see how it plays out, but both of those guys, I think, were going to be interesting players, and both kind of fell into fantasy situations that are not that appealing right now. So, I mean, Warren, it definitely he feels a need for the Colts, but like the quarterback situation is arguably the worst in the NFL in terms of providing consistent production, because they have 4 good wide receivers that we can't get any production out of because of their quarterback play. And he's going to have to fight for targets and earn targets alongside those guys. And if Shane Steichen has to call plays around his quarterback play again, that's also a problem for generating counting stats as well. So it's one of those things that, like, yeah, probably good for the Colts to add a guy like Tyler Warren, but it's an absolute nightmare from a short-term landing spot for us in like fantasy circles.
Warren's fantasy boost or fantasy stock will get a nice boost next year when Drew Aller or Garrett Nussmeier is throwing him passes.
Yes.
I will say, I don't know if I would ever have thought that this sentence would come out of my mouth, but we really need, for Downs and Pittman and for Warren's sake, we need Daniel Jones to win this quarterback battle, because like that's
true.
Don't put that evil on us, Ricky Bobby.
But that's
I
the
still
truth. That's the truth.
am of the opinion that he's going to look superior and complete passes in shorts in the spring and in the summer and potentially win that quarterback battle. They might, just out of trying to give one last shot to Anthony Richardson to start the season, which is why the NFL schedule release in just 2 weeks or 3 weeks is going to be so important. How do they start that Colts season? Do they give them any cupcakes, which would allow Anthony Richardson to look good, win a couple of games and maintain that role? Or is it going to be a more difficult schedule and then they yank Richardson and put in Daniel Jones? So we're going to have some deep schedule analysis coming up your way after the NFL draft here in a couple of weeks. So stay tuned to that. But yeah, that was my quick take there. A couple of things that surprised me a little bit, Ray. One, I don't think anybody was really linking McMillan to the Carolina Panthers.
That was mine.
And
100%.
That was yours?
Where I was.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll let you talk a little bit about that match. But the only thing I will say is what people were doing some dot connecting on that one was the McMillan obviously reminds people of Mike Evans. And of course, we knew the connection there with Liam Cohen, obviously having coached Mike Evans. So that was the whole Jacksonville is going to take him because Liam Cohen wants to replace Mike Evans with McMillan. But the reality is that 2 coordinators before that was not Liam Cohen, but it was Dave Canales, who's now the coach in Carolina. And so maybe he also thought that McMillan reminded him of Mike Evans, who he coached in Tampa Bay before Liam Cohen came to town. So Dave Canales ends up going after and landing McMillan. I got a couple others, but since we're on the subject, why don't you fill that one as well?
Yeah, I'm with you 100%, but mine is more from like a Panthers need perspective, which they did need weapons. Like that is 100% true. But like, I really thought this was going to be a defense pick for them based on like everything that we saw. And they did make some additions there on defense this offseason, but I really thought this was going to be a defense pick just based on who I thought was going to be there. So see McMillan do that. And I'm really interested in both Rich and Ryan's thoughts, because I'm not going to be, analyzing these prospects at the level that either of them do. But like, my question is like, what makes McMillan so much better than a similar player like maybe Jaden Higgins that they could have gotten in the second round? Is he that much better than that they would pick him here, maybe have to wait on defense later? It's an interesting situation, especially after, they spent that first round pick on Xavier Legette last year. I think it was a first round. Was it early second or first round? But it's an early
and
pick.
I mean, I think those last two conversations we had are just go back to what we did last year. We questioned, or the last 2 years, we questioned Anthony Richardson going when the Colts took him, and we questioned the Panthers trading back in for Legette. And these organizations are trying to fix mistakes they made.
But I completely understand. Like you mentioned, defense is a need. Who cares? You got to develop Bryce Young. You've got to get him a weapon. And McMillan is exactly the type of weapon that he needs. He needs a big dude on the outside that he can get the ball to. Because, one of the weaknesses in his game, even as he was coming out, was his downfield accuracy was not a liability, but it was mediocre. And so to have a weapon like McMillan that you can throw the ball to where you don't need pinpoint downfield accuracy, it's a great fit. And you had to get that type of guy. Like Bryce Young's not going to take the next step next year if he's throwing to Thielen, Legette, and Jalen Coker. That's just why it wasn't going to happen. So you had to go get a dude. Now, you mentioned Higgins. Like, if you could guarantee me that I could take like Jalen Walker in the first round and get Higgins at the top of the second, yeah, I think I would probably do that because there isn't a huge gap. I like Higgins a lot. But if you need that big outside guy, like that's it. It's McMillan and Higgins. Like those are the two guys that you trust. And so I think they did the right thing by not risking waiting for that. And just he's on the board. Go ahead and get him because Bryce Young needs him.
I do think Tet 2 has a lot more versatility than Higgins, like right out of the packaging. And Thielen will probably roadblock that year one where he's going to play more X than in the slot, but he has more of a sample of winning on a more diverse route tree than Higgins does and producing after the catch than Higgins. And I like Higgins too. It's just that I still think that there was a pretty clear gap between the two.
Completely agree about that. He can produce after the catch for a big receiver.
Sorry, I was leading the question because I wanted Rich to say that because that is the thing that I took away from Tet, and I didn't want to steal Rich's stats with right after the catch. Which, by the way, all of Rich's profiles are available at sharpfootballanalysis.com. You should go check them out. So much great information in there. But like that was the thing about Tet that really stood out to me. And I still think they should have taken defense here. I still probably would have taken a wide receiver in the second round, especially if Higgins is there. But when I was watching Tet, and the thing that really stood out different than some of these other types of, this genre of wide receiver that we've seen, many of whom have been misses. Rich mentioned a few of them earlier. We were talking about some wide receiver misses. Is I did see more of that, like after the catch ability, creating, moving into the slot, and where we are right now in the NFL, like that stuff's really important. But you had some other surprises there, Warren, on the tip of your tongue.
Yeah, a couple of quick ones. I mean, a lot of fans, I think, were a little bit more surprised than we were, but just, echoing some of the things that surprised people in this first round. I think them taking offensive lineman for the Dallas Cowboys instead of a skill position player was a surprise for Cowboys fans. I think the Bears fans were a little bit wanting them to go, because I was posting on this a lot on the eve of the draft on Wednesday night. Ben Johnson needing that tight end so they can use a lot of 12 personnel packages versus a lot of those guys talking about the fact that, hey, we've already got Cole Kmet. Why do we need tight ends? We need a running back. That's what we really need. And obviously Ben Johnson goes and gets the tight end. And then another one, and of course, the order of the tight end, we already sort of discussed that. Tyler Warren just absolutely falling right into the Indianapolis Colts lap, and their head coach out there basically pleading in the press conferences next to Chris Ballard, like, please, I need a pass catching tight end. I really need a pass catching tight end. And the news came out later that they were trying to move up in prior drafts to get one and never ended up working out. And here all of a sudden, just Tyler Warren, one of the best, like the Mackey Award winner, just falls right into their lap. And then I think it's just those trade ups there at the end of the first round. To me, I'm still curious. The Minnesota Vikings, both Ryan mentioned, both the picks immediately after the Minnesota Vikings teams traded up and gave up what was perceived as like decent capital to move up to those picks. Were the Minnesota Vikings just like not open for business? I thought that they were trying to trade back. Were they not in love with the packages? Because both of those teams who are moving up seem to give good packages. So, I'm interested to hear the aftermath and the press conference that come out and the questions that were asked of the Minnesota Vikings front office. Like, did they not like those packages? Were they so in love with Donovan Jackson that they just needed to get him there and they didn't want to risk anything? So that was probably that one for me. I do want to mention a couple quick things here. Ray, you got to share with people when we're going to be joining them next and other things that are going to be coming out. But number one, go to sharp.football and get all of the free signups there for the newsletter. We're going to be giving out a free package for our NFL future. So make sure that you go over to sharp.football and sign up for our free newsletter, which will be full of information. We said that about a couple times a week after the draft. We're not going to inundate you a ton in the offseason, but we're going to be giving you information and analysis, new analysis that we come up with on a weekly basis as we work to prepare for the upcoming season. And speaking of which, if you go to sharp.football, Rich has his draft kit that's live up there. Now, I personally recommend that you look to buy a full season package because again, then you're going to get the draft kit for basically nothing. But you could also just buy the draft kit if you want to do that. Post-draft rookie rankings, seasonal rankings, projections, tiers, team previews, dynasty rankings and tiers, draft approaches as we get closer into July and August. He's going to be doing YouTube recordings and talking and answering your questions on a one-on-one basis. So much in that package is part of the draft kit. You can also bundle it up and save a ton of money if you want to go that route, which I definitely recommend. And then of course, our preview book, you can see it over here as I'm pointing to it on the screen. That preview book, 500 plus pages. We are working on that. We've been working on it. We're going to now continue to focus intently on getting that to you guys. It'll be out in just about a month and a half, 2 months. So you don't want to miss out on that. Go ahead and pre-order your copy. Head over to sharp.football. That's basically your one-stop shop to get tons of great information and analysis. Before I toss it over to you, Ray, to add a little bit more, Ryan, how quickly do they do grades? I need to know how late they need to stay up so that I can see how you and Brenda did in this mock draft.
The unofficial grades are posted already. It looks like I hit 40 points, which is my goal every year. And with this being a lower scoring year, It's nice to hit that threshold. I think if you hit 40 points every year, you're just kind of hitting doubles every year if you're doing that. And that's kind of my goal. I don't like swinging for the fences to try to win it all. I'd rather just give out good quality information year after year and just hit that 40-point threshold. That's kind of the mark that says you had a pretty solid year.
I love it. I love it. Okay.
And we have to mention that we'll have a day 2 mock from Ryan, obviously coming off a successful day 1 mock, especially seeing the carnage that was that as soon as that trade with the Jaguars and Browns happened, it was going to be carnage. And so coming out of that, mostly unscathed is great. We'll have a day 2 mock, maybe have some day 2 prop bets as well coming out of that. We'll see Rich will have written up every single skill position player from the first round, has their own article. That's all available at sharpfootballanalysis.com. Rich, Ryan, and I will be back on Saturday evening to talk about the draft as a whole, what's going on, kind of our biggest takeaways. So we'll be there. Rich will have his rookie rankings coming out soon, his fantasy football projections, talking about, dynasty rookie drafts and all of that. We'll have draft grades from Ryan. We'll have a way too early 2026 mock from Brendan Donahue. We'll have another way too early one from Ryan. A ton of content left to come out here for the draft. Make sure you're heading over to sharpfootballanalysis.com, checking that out. Make sure you're subscribing to the YouTube channel so you get notified when we go live, when we post something, because we're not even close to finished here with the draft. We're only 32 picks in. We've got a long, long way to go, a long, long Saturday to go. That's going to hurt my watching of Aston Villa in the FA Cup semifinals, but that's neither here nor there. We've got a lot of things coming up here on the website.
And by the way, also one of the things that we're going to be doing in addition to those draft grades on Saturday is I will be doing an analysis of draft capital that was used versus expectation to look at the teams. I'll go through all 32 teams, which teams landed the best prospects compared to where they were expected to go. And that's always a fun exercise and it gets a lot of interest. So that's going to be coming your way Saturday. And Ray, am I doing a podcast with Ryan on Saturday? I don't even know the schedule here. To discuss draft grades, or is that the beginning of next week? Like Tuesday?
That's beginning of next week. That's next Monday night, Tuesday. Where there's so much content.
There is so much. There is so much. We're going to be locked in here Friday night and Saturday. You guys got to make sure that you're following us on social at Sharp Football, up on X. Also, love to see guys up in the chat here. Exile Cultivation, it was great to see you up in here. Michael Ferguson, Rich, I don't know if you see this. He thought that you were Dave Portnoy from Barstool Sports analyzing fantasy prospects.
Can I say that I'm not going to hate on Dave Portnoy, but he went to my local pizza place and gave it a lackluster grade, and I don't know how I feel about that.
Do you disagree or do you agree?
I disagree. I disagree with the lackluster grade of Matt and Angus. I'm a Matt and Angus supporter. So there
what is the name? Matt and Angus?
It's a long story. We're going to be here a while if I explain this one.
We'll have to go to the name, but okay. So we've got a little disagreement with Dave Portnoy, and Ray is a connoisseur of all things.
They can see my
Texas
face,
food, so
they can see my face.
Should know.
They understand the fatness that is happening here, so they are aware that I know a one or two things about food. It's why I'm going to die young. But
not only are you great at indulging in the food, but you're great at all things about cooking the food. When I'm setting up my Blackstone, you're giving me tips and pointers. You're great at cooking the food as well. And Better Boss, of course, it's great to see you here as well in the chat. So if you guys are enjoying the YouTube, head on over there and subscribe. Sharp Football Analysis is the name of the channel. Give us a thumbs up, hit that subscription and the bell. We really, really appreciate that as well. Anything else, Ray, before we go?
I think we're done. I would say we're going to sleep, but we got so much more to get posted tonight. So we'll see you then.
Go,